And that leads us to home specifications, which is another topic, that gets a lot of debate or raised eyebrows, I guess, I would say on this end, whether again, talking to a seller, thinking, oh goodness, what am I going to have to do? What hoops am I going to have to jump through, in order to make this work? So Andy, if you can talk a little bit about that, just kind of go over that in general.
Yes. So I'm gonna put my glasses on because those first two slides you showed me, I realized I couldn't read, which is probably why I was stumbling through them. So
I got mine right here alongside of me.
The first thing that I would say when we talk about home specifications is, regardless of the type of mortgage that you apply for, when the appraiser is assigned a task to go out and value that home and give his opinion on the condition, there's not a manual that tells those appraisers how to behave. There's just suggestions. And what we run into is we run into varying opinions, not only between programs, but between appraisers themselves. So I would like to say that if you were a veteran and you were buying a home, and we sent 3 different appraisers out to that property to give us their opinion of the condition, you may very well get 3 different opinions on the condition of that home. An appraiser that I've worked with for a long time used to always tell me that his job was to go out and give his opinion of whether or not that property was safe, sound, and secure. Now, safe, sound, and secure can be different for all 3 of us. Some people wouldn't necessarily care that there wasn't a handrail on the stairs leading from the porch to the backyard because it was only 3 steps. Well, some appraisers might, but there's minimum guidelines that the appraiser has to adhere to in order to make sure that that property is meeting the guidelines of the loan that you're applying for. So underneath the VA minimum property requirements, these are the things that you'll see most often addressed by an appraiser. Chipping and peeling paint, which for me is a huge sticking point because I don't know that you've been able to buy a can of lead-based paint in the last 30 years. So if you're painting over a house that was, painted within the last 10 or 15 years, and it's a newer home that was built after 1978, the likelihood of that house having lead-based paint are pretty minimal. I would like to see that guideline adjusted to accommodate for houses that were built after that 1978 timeframe date was put in place. But that's a different discussion. The handrails, I certainly understand. Anything with an ascension or descension of more than 3 steps needs a handrail that needs to be secured. Used to be able to just whack up a 2x4 on the wall, and get through inspection and then pull it off. But now they hold you to a little bit of a higher standard. It's got to be something that looks like you're intending to keep it there. And then, of course, you get into the railing and the spindles, and that's obviously to keep little kids from getting their heads stuck in there. A big one, which everybody should be okay with, is GFI outlets close to any type of water source. You certainly don't want to put yourself or anybody else in jeopardy of getting themselves electrocuted. And then the HVAC systems, obviously there's a couple reasons there. You don't want issues with electrical shorting and fire. You're also trying to put the veteran in a position to buy a property that is at least semi-efficient with the heating and the cooling systems. Most of the things that I just talked about on those bullet points, just like any other type of loan, are always going to fall back on liability. Okay. If in the event that somebody would go into that house and eat a lead-based paint chip and get some kind of lead poisoning, there's a possible lawsuit. And the lawsuit's always going to go up the chain to the person with the most money. So same thing with falls off of steps, or issues with electrocutions, or insufficient electric panels and so forth. It's always going to be tied to liability. And we don't want to put a veteran or anybody in a position where they get hurt and have to think about maybe, going to an insurance company or back to the existing lender and saying, well, that property was supposed to have a handrail on it and it didn't, and my wife fell off and broke her hip. So the minimum inspections are designed to protect the veteran as well as the people investing their money in the property, like the insurance agent and the lender, and the VA to an extent. And then as far as the inspections with the wood destroying insect certification, that's a must on every single loan. You can't get around it. And we also need to make sure the water's clean enough to drink so that they're not moving in and getting something that, you know, might make them sick. But, and just to clarify, this is the inspection that goes along with the appraisal. This doesn't have anything to do with the home inspection, which, you know, obviously, Maria, you would be advising them as to whether or not that was something that they would want to do.
Right. So the appraisers, I mean, as you said, their primary job is really to go out there and, you know, appraise the value of the home. But with VA, they do have a little bit of a minimum, you know, the property needs to meet, you know, some minimum requirements, you know, some common sense things, you know, safety items, you know, that kind of thing. I get the question, you know, again, you know, back to, we talked about on the last slide, you know, people wondering, are these requirements tougher than other loans? You know, oh, VA loans, I hear, you know, it's a nightmare. And, you know, what I always say is, first of all, you know, I think they have made changes, you know, over the years. And so there are some minimum standards, but it's not crazy. You know, it's not like, you know, having a top to bottom nitpicking, you know, home inspection, you know, that you have to take care of everything. They're trying to hit, you know, major items. And the other thing that I always say too is, you know, these requirements, anything that's found on, you know, this kind of mini inspection, as you might want to call it, is something that would have been discovered on a whole house inspection anyway. And, you know, likely then you would be negotiating with the seller anyway, you know, to be either making repairs or, you know, somehow being compensated or, you know, again, just negotiating. The difference between, you know, VA and maybe a loan that doesn't have these requirements is that if this does become a requirement, it has to be taken care of prior to settlement. You have to have a reinspection. It has to be cleared. You also don't have the option of, you know, offering some type of compensation for negotiation or any other form of additional closing cost assistance. The repairs have to be made prior to closing, and again, it has to be, you know, reinspected. But the other thing that I point out is, you know, you've got a lot of these same requirements for FHA, USDA, PHFA loans. You know, so VA is not the only loan out there. Definitely don't want to single them out there. You know, these are, and even some conventional loans. Everybody thought, you know, conventional loan, easy button, you know, not the case anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah, we're starting to see them call for things, you know, just like the others do. And because it's common sense, you know, especially when you're talking about big ticket items, you know, like heating and, you know, roofs and things like that. You know, I always kind of put it to buyers that, you know, they're looking at it in, you know, you get into that property and you find out that there's a problem with a major ticket item. Well, most buyers, not all buyers, but most buyers, myself included, you know, when I bought my first home, you're putting every nickel, dime, and penny, you know, into getting in the door. And the last thing that you're prepared to deal with, you know, is a major repair. And if that happens, you're going to be faced with, you know, make the mortgage payment or put a new roof on the house or put a new HVAC system in, you know, so those are things that you will want to avoid as well, you know, which is, you know, looking out for the borrower, you know, and that's a lot of the bottom line as well. You know, they're really trying to, you know, make it a good transaction so it doesn't go south. The other thing to point out here is just as far as whole house inspections, they are highly encouraged because appraisers are not providing a detailed inspection. They're only doing a general visual overview of specific items that are on their list. Anything obvious, you know, while they're in the property. So highly encourage a whole house inspection for sure.
Yeah, and there's been some recent changes too. Now all federal appraisers must operate under the USPAP rules, which stands for Uniform Standard Professional Appraisal Practices. They no longer will do an inspection in the property. They will go in, they'll do a visual, and they'll give you an opinion of value. It's up to you to get a home inspection. The VA appraiser will not come in and make sure the utilities are working. They won't flush the toilets. They won't make sure that all items are working anymore. That's for the home inspector. The USPAP rules do not want the VA appraiser to become an inspector. And they also go by local codes. Whatever local codes are, if that property meets local codes, it meets VA minimum property requirements.
Okay.